When I woke up in the hospital, they told me I was lucky to be alive, that I was born under a lucky star. But the first thing I saw when my eyes could finally focus was my husband's face, and he looked disappointed. This is my story. A story I never thought I'd be able to tell, because I didn't just survive an explosion. I survived a marriage that was designed to kill me. This isn't easy to tell. I was silent for so many years, and now sharing this, it feels like I'm learning how to breathe again. If my story resonates with you, if you believe that, things like this should never be kept in the dark. Please support this story. Your subscription, your like, it's not just a number, it's a sign that I'm being heard, that my voice matters. And now, let me tell you everything from the very beginning. We met at an art gallery opening. The evening was cool, smelling of ozone after a recent rain and the cheap wine they were serving the guests. I was standing in the corner of the room, feeling like an imposter. My paintings, 3 small canvases, were hung on the farthest wall, as if they'd been put there out of pity. I was a young artist, full of hope, but even more full of self-doubt. Important critics in glasses and bohemian women in bright scarves bustled around, and I, in my simple black dress, felt invisible. That's when he approached. Mark. He wasn't like the others. No artistic dishevelment. A perfectly tailored suit. An expensive watch. A touch of silver at his temples that only made him more handsome. He was 12 years older, and that age gap felt like a chasm between my chaotic little world and his orderly universe. His gaze held a sense of calm, his movements a sense of confidence. He was the type of man that makes you instinctively straighten your back and speak more softly. The type that makes you feel safe, like you're behind a fortress wall. He stopped, not in front of me, but in front of my paintings. He looked at them for a long time, his head tilted slightly. I held my breath, expecting some polite, empty phrase. But he said, "There's a lot of rage in these, and a lot of fear of showing it." His words struck me like a physical blow. He didn't say, "Beautiful" or "interesting technique." He looked beneath the layer of paint right into my soul. He didn't shower me with compliments. His courtship in the following weeks was just as refined, as intelligent. He invited me not to loud restaurants, but to private screenings of old films, to small jazz clubs, on long walks through the autumn park. He didn't talk about my appearance, but about my ideas. He listened. He truly listened when I spoke of my childhood dreams and adult fears. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not just noticed, but understood. A year later, we were married. It felt like the most logical, the most correct decision of my life. He was my anchor, my rock. I was his inspiration, his muse, as he loved to say. We fit together like 2 missing puzzle pieces. Our lives intertwined easily, naturally. The first few years were like a beautiful, extended honeymoon. We built a house he designed with enormous windows and high ceilings. This house included a sun-drenched studio for me. He was proud of me, bragging about my work to his important architect friends. Our life was harmonious, quiet, and cozy, and then something began to change. Slowly, like a crack spreading across glass. So imperceptibly that if someone had told me then, I would have laughed. The first bell I ignored was about finances. We had never discussed money before. There was always enough. But one day, he sat down next to me as I was ordering new canvases and paints. He gently took my hand and said, "Darling, are you sure we need these Belgian canvases? Maybe you could find something cheaper? We need to think about the future, about savings." His tone was so caring that I felt like a guilty spendthrift. I agreed. He knew better when it came to money. He was the provider. So I switched to lesser materials. My paintings grew duller, but I convinced myself it didn't matter. Next came my work. My studio in the city, which I still kept to meet with other artists and clients. You get so tired from these trips, he said one evening, massaging my shoulders. This city drains you. Why do you need it? You have a beautiful studio at home. Maybe you should work from here. I'll help you move everything. We'll set up the perfect corner for you. It sounded like a gesture of incredible love and care. I agreed, and my world shrank to the size of our perfect house with its large windows. There were many windows, but they all looked out onto our own garden, surrounded by a high fence dot. Then came the attacks on my friends. My best friend, Lena, whom I'd known since university, became too loud. After one of her visits, when we were laughing our heads off in the kitchen like old times, Mark said to me with a weary sigh, "She talks so loudly. And those vulgar jokes of hers, they have a bad influence on you, Anya. You become so tense after you see her." At first, I defended her, but he did it so skillfully that a bad taste was left in my mouth after every such conversation. Soon, I found myself thinking that Lena really was a bit too much. My calls to her became less and less frequent. Every time I tried to object, every time I felt that invisible ring tightening around my neck, he would look at me with sincere, loving bewilderment. "You're overreacting, sweetheart. I'm just looking out for you. I think you misunderstood me." "That's not what I meant at all. You're not remembering it clearly again." "I never said that. You must be tired." Gaslighting. I didn't know the word back then. I just knew that I was starting to doubt my own sanity. Maybe I really was exaggerating. Maybe I was ungrateful. I had everything: a beautiful home, a loving husband. What more could I want? I became quieter. I stopped arguing. I adapted. I made myself smaller to fit into the perfect picture of a wife he had painted for us. I stayed silent because I thought I was preserving our love, our fragile peace. I had no idea that I was actually preserving a life. His asterisk, the first truly alarming sign that broke through the fog of my compliance, was the brakes. I was driving home from the supermarket in my old but beloved car. The road was on a downhill slope, and before a turn, I pressed the brake pedal as usual, and nothing happened. The pedal sank to the floor with a soft, yielding hiss, as if I'd stepped on a sponge. A second of icy terror. I instinctively pulled the handbrake and swerved toward the shoulder. The car skidded, scraping against the gravel with a sickening crunch, and stalled just inches from a tree. My heart was pounding in my throat so hard. I thought it would burst out. I called Mark. He rushed over in 20 minutes, his face a mask of panic. He pulled me out of the car, held me, repeating, "The important thing is you're safe. The car is just a piece of metal." His concern seemed so genuine. The next day, he picked up the car from the mechanic. The mechanic said it's corrosion. The brake line rusted through. "It's just an old car, nothing to be done." I told you it was time to replace it. I believed him. Why wouldn't I believe the husband who cared so much about me? We sold my car, and I started driving his second, newer one. A month later, my phone disappeared. I was sure I had left it charging in the bedroom, but it was nowhere. We searched for it everywhere. Mark helped me, patiently turning the house upside down. "You probably left it at the cafe when you met with that client," he concluded. The phone was never found. A couple of days later, I started getting strange emails. "A login attempt to your online bank account from a new device has been detected." I dismissed it as a coincidence, as the work of ever-present scammers, and just changed my password. The real fear came later. Due to stress, I started having trouble sleeping, and my doctor prescribed a mild sleeping pill. One night, I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Moonlight fell on the kitchen table, where the bottle of my pills stood. Something caught my eye. I picked up the bottle, same packaging, same name, but inside, were different capsules. Not the usual blue and white ones, but pure white and slightly larger. A chill ran down my spine. Asterisk in the morning, trying to keep my voice steady, I showed them to Mark. Look, this is strange. These aren't my pills. He took the bottle, looked at the capsules, then at me. And in his eyes, there was such deep, sincere pain that I felt ashamed of my suspicions. Anya, he said quietly, taking my hands. Do you hear yourself? You think what? That I switched your medication? Why? To what end? I love you more than life itself. You scare me when you say things like this. He turned my fear into my accusation against him. He spoke so convincingly, so bitterly, that I felt like a monster. He drove me to tears and made me apologize. That evening, he held me, stroked my hair, and told me I needed more rest, that all this stress was getting to me. And I believed him. I so desperately wanted to believe him. I went to a therapist. Not the one Mark recommended, but one I found secretly on my own. I described my anxiety, my panic, my memory problems, which seemed to be getting worse. I told her about my apathy, about how I no longer painted. But I didn't dare tell her my suspicions about Mark. It seemed insane. The doctor, a kind woman in her 50s, suggested it might be prolonged depression or post-traumatic response to some old stress. She advised me to keep a journal, to write down all my feelings, fears, and events, so that we could later analyze them and find the root of the problem. It felt like a lifeline. Paper would bear anything. I bought a beautiful leather-bound notebook and started writing. I wrote about the brakes that failed on the hill, about the missing phone, about the strange white capsules, about the way Mark sometimes looked at me, not with love, but with a kind of assessment, about how he made me doubt myself. The journal became my only confidant, the only witness to my slow decline. I hid it under the mattress in the farthest corner. A week later, I came home earlier than usual and found Mark in our bedroom. He was standing with his back to me by the bed, and in his hands was my journal. My hidden secret journal. He heard my footsteps and turned around. There was no shame on his face, no embarrassment, just a cold, detached expression. I was just looking for my cufflinks, he said calmly, closing the notebook, and I was worried about you. I decided to see what was tormenting you so much. Now I see how serious it is. You need help, Anya, real help. From that day on, my isolation became absolute. He called my therapist, I found out later, and told her about my paranoid entries. He monitored my calls, checked my emails. To help me cope with the stress, I was trapped. And I myself had handed him a map to my mind, to my most secret fears. He studied it, and he began to prepare for the next step. My sister, Anna, lived 100 kilometers from the city. We hadn't been particularly close in recent years. Mark found her too simple and direct, and under his influence, I had started seeing her less. But that month was her son's birthday, and she invited me to visit for the weekend, alone. That was her condition. Mark, surprisingly, didn't object. He was very busy with an important project. Of course, go, darling, he said with a smile. Relax, just take my car. It's more reliable and safer. Yours is getting old. I left late in the evening. Mark had delayed me, asking for help with some blueprints. The night was dark and moonless, the kind where the asphalt merges with the sky. The road was almost empty, with only the occasional lone truck passing in the opposite direction. I turned on the music and tried to relax, looking forward to seeing my sister, to that part of my life where I was still just Anya, not Mark's wife. But something was wrong. Anxiety filled the car like a cold fog. There was a faint smell of gasoline in the car. At first, I paid it no mind. Maybe Mark had recently filled up and spilled a drop. But the smell didn't dissipate. On the contrary, it grew stronger, more intrusive, and the car was behaving strangely. For a moment, it felt like it was losing power, the engine sputtering, then it would run normally again. I blamed it on bad gas. I was almost there, about 10 kilometers to my sister's house. The bright sign with the name of her town had already flashed in my headlights. I thought, I'll call Anna now, tell her I'll be there soon. I reached for my bag and remembered. I didn't have my old smartphone. After the disappearance, Mark had bought me a new simple button phone, so you're not distracted by social media and other nonsense. My sister's number wasn't in it. I hadn't had a chance to add it, and then I saw the light. Two bright, blinding dots were hurtling straight towards me. In my lane, my brain refused to believe what was happening. This couldn't be. A drunk driver? Asleep at the wheel? The seconds stretched into an eternity. I instinctively yanked the steering wheel to the right, trying to avoid a collision, a sharp screech of tires. Mine. The oncoming car seemed to have no brakes at all. The impact was so devastatingly powerful that I was thrown against the seatbelt. It dug into my chest with such force I heard my own ribs crack. The world turned into a kaleidoscope of shattering glass, flying debris, and the shriek of tearing metal. My head hit something hard, and for a moment, everything went black. Then there was the heat. A low, growing rumble that I felt with my entire body turned into the roar of an explosion. A second wave of impact, this one fiery, knocked the remaining air from my lungs and threw me back into my seat. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the flames. The fire was everywhere. I saw it licking the dashboard, saw the plastic melting. The unbearable heat was creeping towards my legs, which were pinned by twisted metal. I could feel my clothes melting, fusing to my skin, feel my hair begin to burn. The smell of gasoline was replaced by the sickening stench of burning plastic and my own flesh. The panic was animalistic, primal. I thrashed, trying to free myself, but my body wouldn't obey. My last clear thought, piercing through the veil of pain and horror, was, I'm going to die here, in this car. And no one will ever know the truth. Then there was only pain. Endless, all-consuming pain and darkness. Waking up wasn't an event, but a process. A slow, agonizing ascent from the bottom of a dark, viscous ocean of oblivion. The first thing I registered was an unbearable, throbbing pain throughout my entire body. Every cell was screaming. The second was a tube in my throat that made it hard to breathe and triggered gag reflexes. The third was the monotonous beep of a machine somewhere nearby. I struggled to open my eyes. My eyelids felt as heavy as lid curtains. The ceiling was white and blurry. I was a live dot, and then I saw him. Mark was sitting in a chair by my bed. He wasn't looking at me, but at the wall, at the heart monitor. His face was devoid of all emotion, no relief, no grief, no concern, just emptiness. Detachment. It was the face of a man looking at a broken object, deciding whether it's worth fixing or easier to just throw away. When he noticed my eyes were open, he flinched slightly. And in that same instant, a mask appeared on his face. The mask of a loving, grief-stricken husband. He leaned forward, took my unbandaged hand. Anya, you're awake. Thank God. I was so scared. His voice was just right, full of compassion. But his eyes remained cold. There was nothing in them. Avoid the doctors told me a passing truck driver had pulled me from the burning car. They said I had second and third-degree burns on my legs and arms, several broken ribs, a concussion, and a complex fracture in my lower leg. They said I was born under a lucky star. That one more minute, and it would have been too late. At night, I couldn't sleep from the pain and the nightmares. I dreamed of fire, of screeching metal, and of Mark's empty face. He was there almost all the time, sitting by my bed, reading books, talking to the doctors. But his presence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, like a lit blanket. One night, when he had gone home to shower and change, a nurse came into my room. She was an older woman named Svetlana with kind, tired eyes. She was adjusting my foredrip and said quietly, almost in a whisper so no one in the hallway could hear, "Your husband is a very strange man." I just stared at her, unable to speak because of the tube. She continued, her voice even lower. "When they brought you in, you were in critical condition. Your chances were slim. He asked the head doctor about the DNR protocol. Do not resuscitate. He said you two had supposedly discussed it. That you were a strong, proud woman and wouldn't want to live as a vegetable." My heart, already beating erratically, skipped a beat, then began to pound furiously. The machine next to me beeped anxiously. "DNR, do not resuscitate." He didn't just want me dead. He had prepared a backup plan in case I survived but was left severely disabled. He wanted the doctors to just let me die if my heart stopped. And he had disguised it as my own will. I looked at Svetlana with a pleading gaze. Gathering all my strength, I managed to rasp out 2 words that scratched my throat. "My sister, did they call?" She shook her head, and her eyes were filled with pity. "He was listed as your only emergency contact. He said he would inform everyone himself once your condition stabilized to avoid causing a panic. He hadn't informed anyone. Not my sister, not my few remaining friends. He had isolated me, even here, in a hospital bed and intensive care. He was my only window to the world. And he was keeping that window sealed shut down in my mind. All the pieces of the puzzle I had refused to see for so long clicked into place, forming one monstrous, fiery picture. The breaks, the swapped pills, my journal in his hands, the explosion, and his disappointed face at my bedside that my savior, my rock, my loving husband was my murderer. And he was very, very upset that he had failed. A few long, agonizing weeks later, I was discharged. Returning home was torture. Mark brought me back to our perfect house, which now felt like a tomb. Every corner, every piece of furniture we had chosen together now screamed of his betrayal. There was the armchair he sat in while reading my journal. There was the kitchen table where I found the fake pills. There was his office where he likely sat for hours planning my death. He was nauseatingly attentive. He settled me into a wheelchair, covered me with a blanket, made me broth. He helped me move around, gave me the painkillers the doctor had prescribed. Every touch from him sent a wave of nausea and icy terror through me. I played the part of the weak, broken, grateful victim. I smiled when he brought me tea. I thanked him when he adjusted my pillow. And inside, I was coiled with hatred and fear. I knew I needed proof. My word alone wouldn't be enough. Everyone would just see a crazy woman with post-traumatic stress and brain damage. The poor thing, after what she's been through, she's imagining things. I knew that was the card Mark would play. I made my move as soon as I had the chance. He said he had to go to the office for a couple of hours. I waited, holding my breath, until the sound of his car faded into the distance. Then, fighting through the hellish pain in my leg and ribs, I got out of the chair. Leaning on the walls, I limped to his office. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the power button on his computer. The password. He might have changed it. But no, the password was the same. Our wedding anniversary. The sickening irony of it. I opened his browser history, and my heart stopped. I scrolled page after page, cold sweat trickling down my back. In the last 3 months, he had searched for insurance payout after spouse's death in car accident, how to tamper with a brake system undetectably, car fire burn time after gas tank explosion, lethal dose of morphine for a 60 kilograms woman, how to stage a car accident with no evidence, legal implications of refusing resuscitation for a spouse. I sat there, staring at the screen, unable to breathe. It was all there, in black and white. A cold, methodical, calculated plan. He had thought of everything. I grabbed the cheap button phone he had bought me and started frantically photographing the screen, line by line. Then I started searching. His desk, most drawers were unlocked, but one, the bottom right, was always locked. I knew where he kept the key in an old book on the shelf. I found it. Inside, under a stack of boring contracts, I found what I was looking for, a folder, and in it, an insurance policy. On my life, for a huge astronomical sum, taken out exactly 2 months ago. The beneficiary, the sole recipient of the payout, in the event of my death, was him, Mark. I photographed everything. Every document, every page, every signature. I connected the phone to the computer, quickly created an anonymous cloud storage account, and uploaded all the photos. Then I deleted them from the phone and cleared the computer's history so he wouldn't suspect a thing. When Mark came home, I was sitting in my chair in the living room, a book in my hands, playing the part of a weak, broken woman completely dependent on him. But inside me, a different fire was burning. Not the one that had almost killed me in the car. This was a cold, furious fire of determination. I knew he would try again, and I would be ready. It happened 3 days after I came home. I knew he wouldn't wait long. My miraculous survival had messed up all his plans. The insurance wouldn't pay out if I was alive. He needed to finish the job. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, facing the wall, breathing evenly and deeply like a sleeping person, but every nerve ending was stretched taut like a wire. I listened to every rustle. In the silence of our perfect home, around 2 a.m, I heard what I was waiting for. A quiet, barely audible creak of a floorboard in the hallway, and then the equally quiet creak of our bedroom door. I didn't open my eyes, but my entire body tensed. I heard his silent footsteps. He came to my side of the bed. I could feel his presence, his shadow looming over me. He stood there and watched. I could feel his gaze on the back of my head. He was waiting, making sure I was asleep. That he stood like that for a minute that felt like an eternity. And then I heard a quiet, distinct click. The sound of a plastic cap being removed from a syringe needle dot. In that moment, my feigned sleep was over. My eyes flew open. He was standing over me, leaning in. In his hand, he held a syringe filled with a clear liquid. In the dim moonlight filtering through the enormous window, his face was a death mask. Calm, focused, businesslike. He flinched when he saw my open eyes, full of terror and hatred. But he was a master of lies. He recovered instantly. She, darling, he whispered in his caring voice. It's just a painkiller. You were in so much pain today. I called the doctor. He said I could give you a shot of something strong if the pills weren't helping. A lie. A brazen, monstrous lie. The doctor had said no such thing. I knew what was in that syringe wasn't a painkiller. It was a lethal dose of morphine for a 60-kilogram woman. In that instant, something inside me broke and was forged anew at the same time. Fear gave way to the animal instinct for survival. I didn't think. I acted. With a scream full of rage, I slammed my hand upward against his. The syringe flew from his fingers, arced through the air, and shattered against the wall, spattering its deadly contents. Mark cursed, his face twisting with fury. He tried to grab me, to pin me to the bed, but I had already rolled to the other side and tumbled clumsily to the floor, landing hard on my injured leg. Ignoring the flash of pain, I crawled toward the door. He lunged after me. His mask was gone. This wasn't a loving husband. This was a rabid predator whose prey had been snatched away. You fool, You crazy fool. You've ruined everything, he hissed. I reached the nightstand in the hallway where I had preemptively left the front door keys. He grabbed my shoulder, but I tore away, leaving a scrap of my nightgown in his hand. I jammed the key into the lock, turned it, and threw the door open. The cold night air hit my face. Limping and stumbling, I scrambled across the perfectly manicured lawn to our neighbor's house. I pounded on their door with my hands and feet, screaming for help, screaming his name, screaming that he was trying to kill me. A light flickered on in the neighbor's window. I heard their dog bark. The door opened. And a few minutes later, our quiet, respectable street was bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of police cars. Mark was arrested right there on our lawn. He didn't resist. He just stood there, shouting that I was insane, that I was having hallucinations after the accident. And then, in the bathroom, in his toiletry bag, they found several more ampules of morphine. The very same ones he had read about so extensively on the internet. The investigation was surprisingly short. My testimony, backed by evidence, was irrefutable. The photos of his browser history, the photos of the insurance policy, the cloud storage account I had managed to create became my trump card. Added to this were the morphine ampules found at the scene and the fragments of the syringe in the bedroom. The police reopened the traffic accident case. The mechanic from that same shop, who was a friend of Mark's, cracked under pressure and confessed that Mark had paid him to support the corrosion story, when in fact the brake line had been deliberately cut. They even found surveillance footage from a gas station near the crash site, showing a second car that had been following me for most of the journey. It all formed an undeniable, ugly chain of evidence. The trial was swift. To the very end, Mark tried to play the victim, the husband, whose beloved wife had gone mad. But he was powerless against the digital trail and the physical evidence. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. For attempted murder with extreme cruelty and premeditation, I sold the house. That perfect house with the big windows was cursed for me. I moved to another city, closer to my sister. I went through long months of physical and psychological rehabilitation. My sister Aina and my old friends, finally learning the whole monstrous truth, surrounded me with such a thick wall of love and care that I slowly began to thaw. I learned to trust again, first and foremost, to trust myself, my feelings, my instincts. One day, about a year after the trial, I was sorting through my mail, and among the bills and junk mail, I saw an envelope, a plain, official-looking envelope. His handwriting was on it, a letter from prison. My hands trembled, and for a moment that icy fear returned. But I forced myself to open it. I had to dot it was not an apology. It was not remorse dot, it was an accusation. He wrote that I myself had destroyed our perfect life. That with my suspicion, my distrust, my selfishness, I had pushed him to the edge. He wrote that the accident was a coincidence, and the syringe was an act of desperation because he couldn't bear to see my suffering. He wrote that he just wanted to free me from the pain I had invented for myself. He wrote that he still loved me, and that if I had been smarter, more obedient, we would still be happy. It was his last desperate attempt at gaslighting, a final attempt to make me doubt reality. I read the letter to the end. There was no pain inside me, no fear, only a cold, calm contempt. And then I went into the backyard of my new small house, placed the letter in an old metal ashtray, and set it on fire. I watched as the fire consumed his words, his lies, his last attempt to control me. The paper curled, blackened. The ash rose into the evening air and dissolved into nothing. Some people survive fires, the kind with flames, heat, and smoke. I survived something colder, more calculated and more terrifying. I survived a plan born In the mind of a man who slept in the same bed with me for 7 years and swore he loved me. The burns on my body have healed. The scars will be with me forever. But now, when I look at them in the mirror, I don't see a reminder of his cruelty. I see a reminder of my strength, that I was able to walk through hell and come out the other side. I'm here. I'm alive. I've started painting again. In my new tiny studio, it smells of real expensive paints. And my paintings now have so much light in them. A bright, furious, invincible light. And I will never be silent again. Thank you for listening to me until the end. My story is one of betrayal, but it's also about the red flags I ignored for so long. I really hope it can serve as a warning to someone. Share in the comments, have you ever faced a situation where your intuition screamed at you, but your mind refused to believe it? What's one red flag you would advise someone to never ignore? Your stories matter too. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. And remember, take care of yourselves and trust your gut.